Jabhat al-Nusra, originally Jabhat an-Nusra, li-ahli ash-Sham, min Mujahideen ash-Sham fi Sahat al-Jihad, or Victory Front for the People of the Levant by the Mujahideen of the Levant on the Fields of Jihad, was founded in January 2012 when military operations between the government forces and groups of armed Syrian opposition were in full force. Jabhat al-Nusra arose with the direct support of the Iraqi cell of al-Qaeda, the Islamic State in Iraq, which was at the time led by Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. At the outset, the leaders of the al-Qaeda tried, with the help of their Iraqi ally, to strengthen friendly jihadist groups in Syria and to unite them into one militant organization. Abu Muhammad al-Julani, a member of the al-Qaeda branch in Iraq, the Islamic State in Iraq, was chosen by Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi to establish an al-Qaeda branch in Syria under the name of the Al-Nusra Front for the People of Al-Sham. Abu Muhammad al-Julani entered Syria from Iraq and began a series of meetings in Homs, Ghouta of Damascus, and Deir-ez-Zor. The first cells of Jabhat al-Nusra were established in the northern Homs countryside, western Ghouta of Damascus, and in al-Bukamal on the Iraqi-Syrian border. On January 23, 2012, Abu Muhammad al-Julani officially announced the establishment of the Al-Nusra Front for the People of Al-Sham, and small groups began to carry out terrorist acts against civilians, attacked the Syrian Arab Army, the SAA, and later began conducting clashes along with Free Syrian Army, the FSA, and ISIS. In a short time, Jabhat al-Nusra, under the leadership of Abu Muhammad al-Julani, achieved a number of military successes and gained fame as one of the most efficient units in the north, northwest, and northeast of Syria. A pivotal moment occurred at the end of 2012 when Jabhat al-Nusra seized many military facilities, arms, and military equipment in the western part of Aleppo. After the movement's detachments were thus strengthened in the western and eastern parts of the province, the main routes of communication between the economic capital of Syria and the Syrian-Turkish border fell under Jabhat al-Nusra's control, which forced other detachments fighting in opposition to Bashar Assad to establish relations and coordinate their actions with the organization. In the Homs province, Jabhat al-Nusra, along with the al-Qaeda branch in Lebanon, Fatah al-Islam, was one of the most powerful fighting factions alongside the Al-Farouk battalion of the FSA, most of whose militants publicly or secretly joined al-Nusra or Fatah al-Islam. Jabhat al-Nusra led many attacks in the old Homs area, Khalidia, and Baba Amro between 2011 and 2012, and led a large-scale attack on January 29, 2012 to capture the towns of Rastan and Talbisa in the northern Homs, and succeeded in that operation. In the south of Syria, especially in the Daraa province, al-Nusra managed to form large forces rapidly and led the attack on Daraa city on March 14, 2012. Within months, it managed to capture most areas within the city of Daraa. On July 15, 2012, Jabhat al-Nusra participated in their first attack on the capital city of Damascus, along with the FSA and Jaish al-Islam. Within days, they managed to capture most areas of eastern and western Ghouta, along with several districts close to the center of the capital Damascus, such as the districts of Jubar and Al-Maidan. Later, the SAA managed to recapture most of these areas. On July 19, 2012, Jabhat al-Nusra participated in the attack on Aleppo city along with groups of the FSA, the most important of which was the Northern Storm Regiment. Within days, they managed to capture the eastern area of Aleppo. Later, Jabhat al-Nusra's influence expanded. At one point, al-Nusra became the sole ruler of opposition-controlled Aleppo, especially after large numbers of the FSA joined its ranks by the end of 2012, and after it took ISIS out of the city in 2014. Since 2013, Idlib has become the main center of Jabhat al-Nusra in Syria and the headquarters of its leadership. Jabhat al-Nusra managed to strengthen its influence further in the beginning of 2014 after the departure of ISIS from the province as a result of a number of disagreements between the groups. Jabhat al-Nusra participated alongside Arar al-Sham in the attack on Raqqa City and managed to capture it on March 6, 2013, 3 days after the attack began. Later in July 2014, ISIS took over control of Raqqa City. Some members of Jabhat al-Nusra decided to join ISIS, while the rest refused to fight it. As a result, al-Nusra withdrew from the city. From the beginning, Jabhat al-Nusra led battles against the SAA in the Deir-ez-Zor countryside and in Deir-ez-Zor city. By 2013, al-Nusra seized most of the oil fields in the city's countryside and, along with the FSA, started an illegal oil trade with Turkey. At the beginning of 2014, with the escalation of ISIS influence in Iraq, al-Nusra began to reduce its presence in Deir-ez-Zor city. After some minor clashes, most al-Nusra fighters withdrew from Deir-ez-Zor to Aleppo and Idlib, while large numbers of al-Nusra foreign militants joined ISIS. It is believed that on April 6, 2014, the remnants of the FSA detonated a VBIED in the Old Homs area with the aim of killing the commanders of Jabhat al-Nusra. The suicide attack was a success, and after the death of the commanders of Jabhat al-Nusra, an evacuation agreement was reached on the 2nd of May 2014. On March 24, 2015, Jabhat al-Nusra led an attack alongside the U.S.-backed Free Syrian Army factions to capture Idlib city, and were able to do so within 4 days. This operation was successful largely due to U.S. support through intelligence and advanced weapons such as the tow missiles, which reached the hands of al-Nusra militants. By 14th of June 2015, Jabhat al-Nusra and its allies from the FSA had managed to capture the entire western Idlib countryside, including the strategic town of Jisr al-Shagor, and carried out a series of massacres against the pro-government population, expelled even the pro-opposition population from the city, and blew up and demolished most of its buildings. With Russian military intervention in Syria and the bombing of the positions of Jabhat al-Nusra in Aleppo, Idlib, and the northern Homs countryside, both the moderate and radical Islamist opposition began to lose strategic initiative in the civil war in Syria. There was a lot of pressure from supporters of Jabhat al-Nusra, Turkey, and Qatar on the leadership of the movement to disengage from and disavow al-Qaeda. After the great advance of the SAA in Aleppo and its success in besieging the eastern districts, Abu Muhammad al-Julani announced on July 28, 2016, the official disengagement of al-Nusra from al-Qaeda and announced the formation of the Jabhat Fatah al-Sham. He stressed that the objectives of the al-Sham Front are the same as those of Jabhat al-Nusra, which is the establishment of an Islamic caliphate in Syria. In an ironic twist, al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri praised al-Julani's decision and declared his support for the Jabhat Fatah al-Sham, prompting everyone, including the United States, to consider the move as a formality. The Jabhat Fatah al-Sham maintained its terrorist classification in all countries, including the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Russia. On October 28, 2016, Jabhat al-Nusra, with its allies from the Free Syrian Army, launched a large counterattack south and west of Aleppo city to break the siege of the SAA in the eastern districts. However, the attack failed 2 weeks later when Jabhat Fatah al-Sham were not able to hold the points it had taken over. On the 28th of January 2017, Jabhat al-Nusra changed its name once again, this time to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. On March 21, 2017, it launched the offensive of the northern Hama countryside, along with the FSA factions supported by the CIA. Most notably are Jaish al-Izza, Jaish al-Nasr, and the Idlib Free Army. These were considered the most important allies of Jabhat al-Nusra in Idlib and a major source of its weapons. The aim of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham's advance was to recapture the settlements it lost in 2016. The active phase of fighting continued until the end of April 2017. For more than a month, neither side had a decisive advantage, and in fact, prolonged fights began, during which a number of settlements repeatedly changed hands. Having accumulated enough reserves in the area and with the support of the Russian aerospace forces, the SAA launched a counteroffensive against the positions of the Islamicists in mid-April and recaptured the territories it had lost at the beginning of the month. On September 19, 2017, HTS, along with the units of the Turkestan Islamic Party and the FSA, once again made an attempt to advance on the positions of the SAA in the northern part of the province of Hama. The aim of HTS was to take revenge for their defeat in the April 2017 offensive. While fighting went back and forth, with settlements being occupied by both sides several times, the struggle continued until the end of September and ended in a stalemate, with neither side able of winning a convincing victory, with each side remaining in their original positions. As time went on, the situation in the province was further complicated by the appearance of the IS militants in early October 2017, as a result of which armed conflict erupted between all opposition groups in the region, which continues at varying degrees of intensity to this day. In late November and early December, the SAA carried out a number of operations against HTS in northern Hama and southern Aleppo, and achieved some success, creating the prerequisites for a push towards the Abu al-Dahr air base. Taking the air base under control will allow government troops to expand the buffer zone adjacent to the road going to Aleppo and cut the front line to the west of Qanasr. The intensification of the activities of the Russian Air Force in the region in the first half of December 2017 gives grounds to conclude that the preparation of the SAA for an attack on the position of radical Islamicists is underway. This offensive is likely to have the goal of delivering a decisive blow to HTS, since it currently presents a greater threat than ISIS. In January 2018, the SAA liberated a large area from HTS in southern Idlib, advancing towards the Abu al-Dahr air base. At the present time, January 2018, the main area of deployment of the armed units of HTS is in the province of Idlib. In addition, the units of Jabhat al-Nusra partially occupy the northeastern part of the province of Hama and the western and southwestern part of the province of Aleppo. After al-Nusra finally broke off relations with al-Sham, one of the most battle-worthy movements in Syria, they gained control of practically the entirety of the province of Idlib. The movement avoids publications concerning the structure of the organization, the real names of commanders of its large units, and the work of its main bodies. It is known that the advisory body, Majlis al-Shura, consisting of 12 people, is at the head of the movement. Based on information surveyed and interviews, HTS operates through 8 divisions, namely military, security, services, religious law, courts, media, finances, and politics. For each of these divisions, there is an office for the Shura Council. In fact, since its inception, Jabhat al-Nusra, HTS, was a coalition of armed formations. As a result of the rebranding conducted in January of 2017, HTS includes such groups as Jabhat Ansar al-Din, Nur al-Din al-Zanki, Liwa al-Haq, and Jaish al-Sunnah. According to information from the organization's website, the new formation also includes groups Tawhid wal-Jihad, al-Rashid ibn Tamiya, Liva Abbas, Sakur al-Iz, al-Sahabat, Kuwaful Shuhada, Usud al-Harb, Liva Arar al-Jabal, and others. Several large groups withdrew from the Arar al-Sham and swore allegiance to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Surya al-Aqsa, Liva Arar al-Jabal, Ansar Homs, and Kurdish paramilitary groups, which together comprised of more than 5,000 soldiers. The process of breaking and mending relations is constant, and there is an alternate structure of the movement as of April 2017. The auxiliary functions are performed by Qism al-Igatha, Department of Relief, Idarat al-Qidarat al-Amah, Public Services Administration, Idarat al-Manatek, and al-Muharrara, Liberated Districts Administration. In the so-called liberated areas where Jabhat al-Nusra has filled the power vacuum, it has created, along with other jihadist organizations, a system of justice and law enforcement called the Sharia Authority, al-Hayya al-Sharia. The Sharia Authority operates its own police force called the Sharia Authority Police, Shurtat al-Hayya al-Sharia. The military structures of the groups varies depending on the geographical location of the fighters in Syria. In Damascus, where the partisan tactics of fighting were employed, the divisions were divided into separate detachments, while in Aleppo, military operations were conducted by full-fledged military formations, consolidated into brigades, regiments, and battalions. That the movement actively recruits groups of militants formed on the basis of national and religious grounds. There are units of militants from Ajnadal-Kavkaz, Caucasus Emirate, natives of Chechnya, and the Turkestan Islamic Party in Syria, Uyghurs, and natives of the Central Asian countries of the former USSR. From a military point of view, this is convenient for management and interaction, since there is no language barrier between the fighters and the commanders. Upon returning to their host country, such a detachment is practically a ready-made cell with combat experience, in which each member knows one another, trusts his commander, and is ready to act in the interests of the parent organization. Western experts estimate that in less than 2 years of its existence, there were almost 5,000 people from 60 countries who fought for the movement. The core military formations varied in their numbers and at times amounted to up to 30,000 people. Together with the added paramilitary groups of like-minded people, the total number reached 70,000. At present, the number of formations is smaller, and the core of the grouping, according to the estimates of the General Staff of the RF Armed Forces as of August 2017, consists of up to 15,000 men. Together with units of radical Islamicists from other groups, it amounts to a total of 25,000. The armament of the movement consists of small arms, artillery, and tanks seized from the SAA, from various anti-Assad forces, and equipment received from foreign sponsors from the Gulf countries through the jihadist movements with direct or indirect U.S. assistance. In addition, according to reports, the movement has chemical weapon reserves. In December 2012, at the SYSA-CCO chemical production plant, 30 kilometers east of Aleppo, the al-Nusra units captured about 200 tons of chlorine. In May of 2013, Turkish Special Services arrested insurgents of al-Nusra on the border with Syria for attempting to acquire sarin components. An indicative example of direct or indirect U.S. support is the use of American ATGM BGM-71 TOW by the al-Nusra forces. These units were transferred to the armed formations by the moderate opposition, for example, FSA units Harakat Hazm. Subsequently, the ATGM systems were either voluntarily supplied or forcibly taken from other groups by HTS. At the end of September 2015, the 30th Division of the opposition, supported by the U.S. government, surrendered to the units of al-Nusra and handed over a large number of ammunition, small arms, and artillery weapons, and a number of light vehicles. The same happened with the FSA's 13th Division in March of 2016, which directly received American weapons. At the end of June 2016, the leaders of the Syrian opposition, primarily from al-Sham, conducted negotiations and consultations in light of Russia's actions against al-Nusra, which also threatened other groups. As a result of such meetings in the western part of the province of Aleppo and in Idlib, it proposed to either dissolve al-Nusra into a new association, which would be headed by Aram al-Sham, or to tear it away from al-Qaeda. The situation was such that a third of al-Nusra, first of all the ethnic Syrians, were ready to break with al-Qaeda and join a new group. Then the leadership of al-Nusra undertook a rebranding, which on the one hand was to save it from a split, and on the other, in the eyes of the Syrians, to root it in the Syrian revolutionary movement. As a result, al-Nusra became known as Jabhat Fatah al-Sham, Front of the Conquest of Syria, and proclaimed its formal departure from al-Qaeda. After this, the leadership of Jabhat Fatah al-Sham attempted to unite with Arar al-Sham and other factions. However, this would have led to the inclusion of all participants of this union on the list of internationally recognized terrorist groups. As a result, the attempt to create a Syrian Islamic Commission at the end of 2016, in which al-Julani wanted to play a key role, failed. There are other reasons why al-Nusra began to act under a new name. First, it allows sponsors and leaders of the movement to avoid sanctions, since al-Nusra periodically gets on the consolidated list of legal entities affiliated with or associated with al-Qaeda organization compiled by the UN Security Council. Updating the list in light of objective reasons is not keeping up with the evolution and expansion of al-Qaeda and its subsidiaries. Secondly, it is more convenient for Western special services to deal with groups not listed on the list of UN Security Council and/or on the American or European list of terrorist organizations. Instead, they prefer to deal with rebels who declared their secession from al-Qaeda. On January 28, 2017, Jabhat al-Sham conducted another rebranding and was named Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, Organization for the Liberation of the Levant. This coincided with increased pressure on opposition groups in Syria and with a turning point in the Syrian war, the liberation of Aleppo. The military defeat near Aleppo, where Jabhat al-Nusra lost the bulk of its most trained fighters and much of its technology, was a turning point in reducing its influence. Military success in the first years of the Civil War declined to the point where, starting from 2014, the movement started to systematically weaken and accept moderate groups, which represented secular and national opposition. In November 2014, Jabhat al-Nusra attacked the Syrian Revolutionary Front, a large association that fought under the banner of the FSA and the National Coalition of Syrian Revolutionary and Opposition Forces, and received assistance from the United States and its allies. Its leader, Jamal Maruf, was forced to flee to Turkey. Then the jihadists attacked the camps of the movement, Harakat Hazam, which the U.S. planned to thoroughly train and supply with weapons, and which many American analysts viewed as the most acceptable variant of the modern opposition. As a result, Jabhat al-Nusra, at the end of October 2014, seized the base of the Hazam movement in Idlib, and in January 2015 displaced it from Aleppo, effectively forcing it to dissolve and merge with other militant groups. At the end of September 2015, al-Nusra attacked the 30th Division of the FSA, forcing some of the fighters along with their arms to cross over to their side. The jihadists particularly intensified the fighting against the moderate opposition after the U.S. and its allies began to conduct airstrikes at the end of September 2014, not only directed against the positions of the IS, but also targeting Jabhat al-Nusra. Thus, the movement played an important role in the failure of the U.S. project to create a secular military opposition in Syria. Since 2012, the FSA's relations with Jabhat al-Nusra have been excellent. The FSA and the U.S.-backed factions support Jabhat al-Nusra financially and, most importantly, with the weapons supplied to them by the CIA and Turkey. However, al-Nusra did not hesitate to turn its weapons against the FSA or hesitate to eliminate any group that opposed its will, especially in the province of Idlib and in Aleppo countryside. As for the relationship of Jabhat al-Nusra with Ahrar al-Sham, one of the largest groups in the north of Syria, while Ahrar al-Sham obeys the orders of Jabhat al-Nusra and treats its leadership with respect, Jabhat al-Nusra takes firm action with Ahrar al-Sham and has not hesitated to use its weapons against it in 2017. It has even issued a statement calling the militants of Ahrar al-Sham infidels after clashes with the 46th Regiment in the northwest Aleppo countryside. However, the militants of Ahrar al-Sham, despite a number of them being killed or wounded by al-Nusra tanks, refused to return fire on the al-Nusra militants. It is also believed that Jabhat al-Nusra pushed Ahrar al-Sham into a losing battle in Aleppo in order to weaken it. The final gulf between the two armed movements formed in July 2017. The reason for the conflict, in addition to purely ideological differences, was the fact that the al-Sham group controlled the Bab al-Hawa border crossing on the Syrian-Turkish border, which was an important transport corridor, as well as a source of finance and the replenishment of the military formations of the moderate opposition. Perhaps the most important reason for the conflict was the issue of control over the civil administration of the province of Idlib. The disagreement of Jabhat al-Nusra with ISIS began at the end of 2013 when al-Nusra separated its link to the Islamic State in Iraq, now ISIS. And the controversy increased in 2014 when Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi announced the formation of the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, the separation from al-Qaeda, and the establishment of the Islamic Caliphate. Al-Julani rejected Abu Bakr's allegiance to the Caliphate. The basis of the controversy is that Jabhat al-Nusra believes that the Caliphate should be established after capturing the whole of Syria and Iraq, while ISIS believes that the Caliphate should be established in any area under its control. Although there was a great deal of talk about clashes between the two parties, clashes were rare, short-lived. Jabhat al-Nusra withdrew from Deir-ez-Zor and Raqqa, while ISIS withdrew from Aleppo and Idlib, with large numbers of militants from al-Nusra changing their allegiance to ISIS. Al-Nusra developed a difficult relationship with the movement of Nur al-Din al-Zenki, numbering 7,000 militants in 2017. In 2015 and 2016, both sides participated in clashes against each other. However, in January 2017, the Nur al-Din al-Zenki group in Idlib joined with al-Nusra. In the second half of July 2017, there was a conflict between the leadership of Nur al-Din al-Zenki and Hayat Tahrir al-Sham because of the statement made by an authority figure from Nur al-Din al-Zenki saying that there is no Sharia rule in the territory controlled by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Since HTS strategy is aimed at cooperating with local Islamist organizations that recognize the main goal of establishing an Islamic State and Sharia in Syria, such an approach does not allow Syrian Islamist groups, including Jaish al-Islam, to oppose al-Qaeda in Syria in the face of Jabhat al-Nusra, HTS. Both groups profess Salafi Islam, and both groups raise the issue of overthrowing the existing power. According to a former leader of Jaish al-Islam, Muhammad Zaran Alush, there was a fraternal relationship between his organization and Jabhat al-Nusra, and the existing insignificant ideological differences could be resolved through the discussion and application of Sharia norms. In his interview, Zaran Alush said that he personally met with one of the leaders of Jabhat al-Nusra, Abu al-Qahtani, and found no difference between the Sharia of Jabhat al-Nusra and the Sharia of Jaish al-Islam. In 2013, Jaish al-Islam, together with Jabhat al-Nusra, organized a bloody massacre in the city of Adra, directed mainly against minorities, most notably the Alawites. After the death of Muhammad Zaran Alush as the result of an airstrike conducted on December 25, 2015, the new leadership of Jaish al-Islam soon began to disagree with the leadership of Jabhat al-Nusra. This took place in light of the fact that the Islam Army has taken a strong stance in favor of negotiations with Zaran Alush's cousin and close companion, Muhammad Alush, heading the opposition diplomats in Geneva. Participation of various groups of moderate opposition in the Syrian settlement under the patronage of Turkey, Iran, and Russia led to a split in the ranks of these groups, which significantly weakened their position in the country. In this respect, the case of the Jaish al-Islam movement can serve as a prime example, since the movement formally participates as a group and represents the moderate opposition. It had to sever its ties with HTS. In practice, the situation is quite different. Eastern Ghouta, Jaish al-Islam, HTS, Arar al-Sham, and al-Rahman Corps are the most influential groups in this area near Damascus. All of them, in spite of some tensions, actively cooperate against the SAA. The peak of Jaish al-Islam's participation in the fight against HTS was when the group allegedly did not come to the aid of HTS during the battles in the area of Jobar, the Ghouta district. However, the truce in the region is very controversial. Not long ago, al-Sham conducted a series of major attacks against the army in the area south of the Duma, the area of the Army Armored Vehicles Base. Eastern Kalamun. The militants did not show much activity here, and before negotiations in Astana, there was a truce. In fact, Jaish al-Islam is forced to share resources and interact with HTS in this region. As a result, it turns out that the leaders of this moderate opposition did not actually do anything of substance in constructively participating in the Astana process and limited themselves exclusively to vague formal gestures such as sending delegations and making loud statements in the media. Therefore, one can make the disappointing conclusion that the real influence of the Astana format on the situation in Syria is of much significance than originally thought, and the format is not very effective. Statements of the high-ranking officials of the Russian Foreign Ministry about successful negotiations are not accurate. To date, the moderate opposition does not want peace. It continues fighting, repeatedly delays negotiations, and awaits the intervention of other countries. Separately, it is necessary to focus on 4 zones of de-escalation in Syria, the boundaries of which were determined by the agreements in Astana on September 16, 2017. The agreement established the boundaries of de-escalation zones, where, as agreed, military operations between government forces and forces of the armed opposition groups, which have already joined the truce or will join it in the future, are to be halted. To prevent incidents and clashes between various sides along the borders of zones, security bands were created. They include observation posts and checkpoints for the movement of unarmed civilians, delivery of humanitarian aid, and facilitation of economic activities. The work of the checkpoints and observation posts, as well as the management of the security zones, is carried out by personnel from Russia, Turkey, and Iran. This begs many questions, chief among them, why is there no mention of withdrawal of heavy weaponry nor the surrender of weapons inside the zones? The most extensive zone of de-escalation is located in northern Syria. It contains the province of Idlib, as well as the bordering northeastern parts of the province of Latakia, the western provinces of Aleppo, and the northern regions of the province of Hama. It is worth noting that the province of Idlib is one of the most problematic. It is here that the main forces of the terrorist organization Jabhat al-Nusra, HTS, are based, and it was here that Syrian authorities brought militants and members of their families from Aleppo. According to Turkish President Recep Erdogan, Russia will provide security outside of Idlib, while Turkey will ensure security inside of Idlib. Turkey had the right to deploy in Idlib via a small group of troops whose task is to organize observation posts, but they are not to form a full-fledged army group. However, by October 13, 2017, about 50 units of armored vehicles and 200 servicemen crossed the Turkish-Syrian border. The pro-government Turkish newspaper Yeni Şafak claimed that 25,000 Turkish soldiers were mobilized to carry out military operations in Syria. Thus, in the northern part of the Idlib province, the so-called free zone from Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is created under the auspices of Turkish forces. The area will host the forces of the moderate opposition and Turkish troops. In the south, the province of Hama will host Russian observers. The forces of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham will be moved to a zone located in the middle. This way, HTS will be deprived of any possibility of reaching the border. Meanwhile, in the zones controlled by radical Islamicists, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham blames the moderate opposition for abandoning the war against the Assad government and entering into peace agreements. At the same time, the movement, aside from fighting battles against the SAA, is actively engaged in attacks against factions of the moderate opposition. Jabhat al-Nusra is considered to be one of the most well-equipped and well-armed formations fighting against government troops. According to some estimates, before the conflict with the Islamic State, January 2012 through April 2013, half of ISIS's budget was sent to Jabhat al-Nusra. At the same time, the group received significant funds from Syrians with sympathies for radical Islam. From April 2013 to the end of 2014, the budget of the movement was largely replenished by the illegal trade of oil acquired from the east and northeast of Syria. When the oil prices dropped, IS exerted control over these oil fields, and the movement lost this source of financing. From the end of 2014 until the present, al-Nusra's main source of financing comes from external sources. Most of the funding comes from the charitable Salafi foundations in Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and from high-ranking clerics and wealthy businessmen who sympathize with the ideas of Salafi Islam of Jordan and Turkey. Hamid bin Abdallah al-Ali is an example of a person who sympathizes with the ideas of the movement. He is an influential Salafi cleric in Kuwait. He has facilitated the transfer of funds, weapons, supplies, and fighters to and from Syria for Jabhat al-Nusra. Shafi Sultan Muhammad al-Ajmi is a native of Kuwait. He is included by the UN Security Council in the list of persons sponsoring al-Qaeda and related organizations. Together with his assistants, he raised funds and gathered weapons under the pretext of charity. He personally delivered the collected funds to various groups, including Jabhat al-Nusra. Abd al-Rahman al-Nuaimi is a Qatar-based terrorist financier and a facilitator who has provided money, material support, and conveyed communications to al-Qaeda and its affiliates in Syria. In 2013, Naimi ordered the transfer of nearly $600,000 to al-Qaeda via al-Qaeda's representative in Syria, Abu Khalid al-Suri. Ali bin Abdallah al-Suwadi is the general manager of Mu'assasat Eid bin Muhammad al-Thani al-Karira, the Eid bin Muhammad al-Thani Charitable Society. In this role, Ali al-Suwadi manages the budget and directs the activities of the charity, including its work with organizations that have been tied to al-Qaeda. According to media reports, Ali al-Suwadi worked with U.S.-sanctioned al-Qaeda financer Abd al-Rahman al-Nuaimi to transfer funds to jihadist militants in Syria, including al-Nusra. Social networks are another important source of financing. Recruiters in social networks are urging a transfer of money for the aid of militants fighting in Syria. Given that financing terrorism is prosecuted in many countries, the fee is made in disguise to a bank account of an intermediary. The sponsors transfer sums not large enough to attract the attention of bank employees and law enforcement officials. The intermediary then sends money to a foreign bank, to the owner of a money transfer office in Turkey or Jordan, for example. He informs his colleague in Syria that the money has come, provides the name of the recipient, and gives a password. Money is given from a cash register. Such transactions leave no traces and are hidden from those who are fighting to interdict and disrupt the funding of terrorism. In addition, the groups continue to actively engage in kidnapping, extortion, and collection of taxes from citizens and businesses in controlled areas. The group also developed a scheme to collect funds from small and medium-sized businesses in territories which are not directly controlled by HTS, but territories that host enough HTS emissaries and combat groups to the extent that those groups can facilitate racketeering. Al-Qaeda, as the lead organization which promotes the idea of ultra-radical Islam, is in financial crisis. It receives less and less financing from sympathetic individuals and from so-called charitable foundations to carry out its terrorist activities. This necessitated some optimization of costs. The movement had to change its tactics and constructed a new model aimed at interacting with self-sufficient extremist organizations which do not require support from the lead organization. In this format, Al-Qaeda plays a dual role. First, it acts as a military advisor and mediator for radical Islamist groups. Secondly, it sends authoritative clergymen to various war zones. Al-Qaeda also provides local groups with their own schemes for the transfer of funds, facilitates the creation of enterprises, and provides information to support local organizations. When Aleppo was captured by government troops in late 2016, the appearance of HTS signaled a new phase of restructuring of the radical opposition in Syria. Yet another attempt to rebrand was nothing more than a formal effort by al-Qaeda to disassociate itself from its supporters in Syria, as well as its desire to withdraw moderate Islamicists from the negotiation process on the future of Syria in Astana. The leadership of HST wanted to overpower, and if that failed, to destroy the entities that are part of al-Sham. They sought to become the single center of Sunni militarism in Syria. This caused a split among the opposition, and the most radical of its representatives moved to the newly created Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which marked the beginning of a conflict between the two largest groups in Idlib. To support its strategy, HTS operates through four main bureaus: General Administration of Services, Military and Security Operations Wing, Dawah and Guidance Office, and Sharia Courts. There are 156 local councils operating in the Idlib province with the following administrative divisions: 9% city councils, 30% town councils, and 61% municipal councils. Of these local councils, 86 operate in HTS-controlled areas, 14% city councils, 39% town councils, and 47% municipal councils. In August 2017, a conflict arose between the local city council of Idlib and the General Administration for Services, which is connected with the HTS. The latter began the process of making unilateral decisions. The General Administration for Services issued circulars for local councils informing them that it was the only body with the authority to monitor their work and required the transfer of the relevant council departments to the specialized agencies of the movement. In particular, this affected services which supply water and bread as well as transport. The City Council rejected the request, and on August 28, 2017, HTS units stormed the City Council building of Idlib and ordered all those who disagreed with the policy to leave the building. In this way, radical Islamists gained control over administrative services of the city. The process where smaller formations join or leave the grouping is not static. On November 14, 2017, representatives of the group Ajnad al-Sham announced through Twitter that they are joining Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Ajnad al-Sham militants participated in earlier clashes with the Syrian Arab Army in western Aleppo, in the north part of the province of Ham, and in the province of Idlib. In late October, there was information that the Central Division of the FSA, Falak al-Sham, and Jaish al-Izah also joined Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham also conducted operations against smaller militant groups who then sought support from al-Sham. For instance, the group Jaish Mujahideen was attacked by terrorists of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham in January 2017. At this time, the radical Islamists seized warehouses with weapons. After that, part of Jaish Mujahideen's forces were forced to join al-Sham, while the other part joined HTS. Be that as it may, year after year, HTS leadership adamantly follows its goal: the unification of all jihadist organizations in Syria under its leadership and the construction of the emirate. Radical Islamists are strongly established in the province of Idlib and will do all they can to prevent the creation of a de-escalation zone. The following conclusions and analysis can be drawn from all the information presented thus far. After the defeat of the IS in Iraq and Syria, the most effective group that stands to oppose Assad's regime remains Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. This movement has the necessary number of trained militants in its ranks to confront the government army. It has a rather positive image when compared with the IS and advocates the idea of opposing the betrayal of the interests of the people of Syria. Meanwhile, the conflict between the factions within the movement itself, the conflicts with other armed groups, the reduction of logistical support, and problems with financing all lead to a gradual degradation of HTS. we can conclude that to overcome these problems, the leadership of the movement may hold another rebranding. This conclusion is based on the fact that at a turning point in its existence, al-Nusra, HTS, is able, in words, to abandon the ideas of radical Islam in order to preserve their ability for an armed struggle and to establish itself as a legitimate and independent force in the ongoing war.